In this video, I'm going to explain what solution means to the Negro. There's a reason why the Negro does not want solutions, and that reason is because when you have a solution to a problem, that means everything is over, finished, done. And once the problem is solved, you have to move on. You see, when you're dealing with a codependent person like your Negro, he does not want solution because he doesn't want to deal with the problem and he doesn't want to move forward. He doesn't want to um, continue on because as long as he's got the problem there, he can get attention, he can get his needs met, and he can sit there and and he can sit there and continue to perpetuate, in his malaise and just sit there and be a crybaby and a complainer. And people and this is how he gets his attention. This is how people pay attention to him. He doesn't know, how to do things and get positive attention for himself. So he sits there as a victim, thinking that being a victim is a position of power. Unfortunately, being a victim is not a position of power. Being a victim is actually a position of powerlessness. You're powerless when you're a victim. That means other people are controlling your life, other people are controlling your situation, and other people have, you know, they master your destiny. I saw this, this same dysfunctional codependency, that's in the Negro happen to other people of other races with 9/11. That they were victims, they were powerless. There was nothing they could do. But what happens with this Negro is, he doesn't want those solutions because, again, when you have to move forward, you have to start taking those steps in a positive direction. When you're moving forward, there's the incident that happens, and then there's the recovery. And on the journey to recovery, this is how you become a survivor. And the Negro never hits the survivor stage in his life or her life because you have these enablers like your white liberals, your black pastors, your pro-black Afrocentrics, even these single mothers and other Negroes in the community who enable this Negro by making excuses for him, um, telling him that what happened to him was not his fault, that, they'll help him get better, when really they don't want him to get better because in a codependent situation, you have the victim and then you have the abuser. The abuser gets their power from keeping the victim at the bottom and keeping them powerless because this is how they get their needs met by having that person at the bottom. So you got to understand with codependency, that's just two people. Both of them are depending on each other. And it's a dysfunctional relationship because these two people are depending on each other. One guy is carrying all of the load and the other one is getting their needs met through them. And this is what happens with this Negro. His codependency, keeps him in that victim mode. Now I'm going to tell you a story about what happened to me in 1989 when I was at Park West High School. Now, in '89, I had this Reebok leather jacket with leather sleeves, and one day I decided to go on. I was going home on the train, and this mob of Negroes decided to mug me and beat me up. And after what happened, I was really traumatized and deeply troubled and depressed, and I found myself in the victim position. And for a couple months, I was missing school because I couldn't even go to school because I had such anxiety and such depression. And eventually, it just got to the point where everything was falling apart. I was starting. It's like then I realized it's like because it was part of being in the victim stage is that you then eventually. Well, let me try to articulate myself. But usually, when I was in the victim stage, I was just really depressed. I was really out of it, and I couldn't really deal with anything. I mean, my grades started to slip. Things just didn't go well. But it's like eventually people just it's like eventually I got tired of being a victim. Eventually I got tired of dealing with these dysfunctional Negroes because some of them after they found out were actually making fun of me, saying that it was good that it happened to me, and I started to realize when I hit that rock bottom point the truth about this Negro. Because these are the same Negroes who would just be complaining to me all the time about, everything is wrong, stuff is wrong with me, stuff is wrong with me. And I realized, I thought, you could accommodate this Negro, but I realized you could not accommodate this Negro and because he's just totally dysfunctional. And, you know, his idea of getting his needs met are to try to push people in these codependent relationships because he does not know how to do things, on his own. And what came out of the whole thing is that I changed because I managed to, you know, because I really wanted to get out, well, away from these Negroes because I prayed to God to change my life. And, he worked through my mother. And because I had this fight with one of these Negroes who stole my jacket, decided to go wear it and show it off. And after that incident, my mother decided to make me change schools. Now, at the time, I didn't think it was the right decision because I wanted to just keep, persevering. But then, looking back at it 25, 26 years later, I realized it was the right decision for me because when I changed environments, my life changed and I started working towards the process, the journey towards becoming a survivor. And this is what the Negro, your process gets impeded by these enablers. You see, my family didn't enable me. Um, and my mother didn't enable me. I thank God that she didn't enable me because thanks when I changed schools, it changed my life. And then I started, getting things together. When I moved to Taft High School and I transferred over there, now people said this was one of the worst schools in New York City. When I got there, and I had my mind right, I wound up on a dean's list in the first semester. I mean, at Park West, I did well, in one in the SOAR program, but it was a total change. I mean, when I got away from the Negro and his dysfunction, I was able to perform and I was able to excel. And I thought, again, in 1990, I thought it was a bad decision, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions ever made in my life that I changed schools because, I prayed to God to change my life, and He worked to change it with myself and my efforts, and because I had to put some effort in too, along with my mother. And the whole thing is that I didn't see it, but now I see it now. 25. This is why I can talk about it and talk about solutions because that was a solution right there. See, my mother said, the problem has to be solved. Once the problem is solved, you have to start making steps to move forward. And that's the whole thing with solutions. That's what solution means. Solution means the problem is solved. This issue is finished. You say you're trying to learn and you can't learn. We're going to put you in another school. That's what my mother's solution was. Once that solution was made, from there on, I started doing well in classes. Wound up on a dean's list. Wound up doing exceptionally well. Because my Taft High School career, all 3 years of it, was better than my Park West career. Now, I had one good year in Park West, and I was doing very well, starting in the semester. But then here comes the Negro and his social currency and his do you have a girlfriend, his shaming tactics, his nonsensical need, for attention because he does not, again, know how to get his needs met. And that held me back. I mean, one of the reasons why I don't like being social with the Negro because I want to socialize with this, with black people. But when you deal with this Negro, when you deal with him, he does not want solutions. He does not want, you know, to work towards moving along, taking a journey where you go from goal to goal to goal to goal. He doesn't want to do that. Because I've also run into this type of Negro, in other jobs. And I've even run into, white people with the same mentality. Just not really white people, Jewish people with the same mentality. And they have the same codependent relationship with dysfunctional Negroes. And again, solution means that problem is solved. It means the problem is done. It means, you know, we fixed this, this is taken care of, and from here on in, it's time for us to start working towards, goal number 2. And that was in my life. I was like, I'm going nowhere in this school, um, and I want this diploma. And the only way for me to get this diploma is for me to change schools. Now, there was also other issues. My grade advisor pretty much written me off, and I had said to myself, this situation, this is sciences again, isn't working. And you get to that point, You want to break out of that victim mold. And the whole thing is that on the other side of the victim is the survivor. And the Negro doesn't want to be a survivor. He doesn't understand that the survivor is actually a stronger person. They come from a position of strength. They have confidence, and they also have, wisdom from their experiences, to teach others. And this is one of the reasons why I'm making this video. You see, 25, 30 years ago, I couldn't even talk about, what had happened to me on this train, on this N train back in 1989. But, I look at, what had happened, in a Facebook group, about last Saturday, and it inspired me, to come and talk about this story and talk about this point in my life, because when I saw what these Negroes were doing, I saw that they did not want solutions. I felt, I would just talk about, I talked about in another video, the light skin, dark skin, that straw man argument, and I understand what solution meant, because in my life, I understand, if you want something, you're going to have to solve problems, and you're going to have to solve them for yourself, because this is something my mother, insisted I do. That, eventually you reach a point where people who support you will support you to a point, and then they're going to expect you to be on your own and start doing for yourself. But what the Negro doesn't understand, because his white liberal enabler, his Negro pastor enabler, and his Afrocentric enabler tell him he's a victim all the time, he learns to become dependent on these people. And this is what leads to the relationship becoming codependent. Just like in your relationship between your black woman and your thug, it's not a dependent relationship, interdependent relationship where both partners are carrying an equal load. Eventually it becomes a codependent relationship, because the black woman is on the job and the Negro is sitting in the house all day, and she's paying all the bills for this Negro. She's buying his clothes. She's feeding this Negro, and he's just sitting in the house all day, and that's a codependent relationship. And this relationship, is not a healthy one. This is why, this Negro acts dysfunctional in the way that he acts, because in a codependent relationship, in these relationships between this woman and this man, what usually happens is this man is like a handicapped child. And I've said this in books like Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, and I've even talked about it in different blogs on my official blog, www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com. This guy is like a handicapped child, because I have a family member with disabilities, and it's like taking care of a retarded child. And because the person never grows. This Negro never grows. He stays in the same state of arrested development. And if you want to grow, you start to realize, people who are in arrested development, you can't deal with. And that was the conclusion I came to in 1989 at Park West, is that if I want to grow, I'm going to have to leave these Negroes behind. And sadly, here in 2015, after my experience with this dysfunctional Facebook group, I'm coming to the same conclusion regarding this Negro. 25 years has helped me come to this, conclusion about this Negro. The same Negroes I was dealing with in 89 are now adults, and they're still stuck in this perpetual state of arrested development. They refuse to change. They refuse to, take responsibility for their lives. They refuse to do what they need to do. And they don't want to move towards, problem solving. Because all the problems in the black community, as other people have said, like David Carroll and Makwisi 100 have said, these are problems that Negro can solve himself, because I'm an example of it. I can solve the problem myself. And I have. If I want to do things, with God working with me, I can solve the problem. This is what the Negro doesn't want to do, because again, solution means I can't be a victim. Just like people with 9/11, they couldn't be victims. There was a point where they had to start picking up their lives and moving forward. Because I saw the same codependent pattern starting to build, with the rebuilding of, the World Trade Center back then. I started to see it. The victims kept coming back and complaining about, this, that, the third, regarding the rebuilding, and it held up the process. And eventually, people just got tired of hearing them and said, we just have to build this Freedom Tower, because the costs were starting to overrun. The government had allocated a couple of $1 billion to rebuild that site. And what had happened was these people kept coming back and talking about their families. They kept continuing to be a victim, and they never healed. And, you know, they had no choice but to just move these people forward, move these people aside so they can move forward and build this freedom tower and, redevelop this site. Because eventually you reach a point because with people who are victims, you realize that they don't want a solution, especially perpetual victims. And this is something also I learned, over the years reading a lot of this black African-American literature, is that a lot of these characters, in these books like Your Waiting to Exhales and your other books, this Nappily Ever After. Nappily Ever After pretty much shows you an example of what I'm talking about, this perpetual victim. Eventually, people get tired of having to deal with you because every day is a problem. Every day there's just an issue. People just get tired of dealing with you because eventually people are expecting you to start solving your own problems, and the Negro does not want to solve a problem. He does not want to take responsibility for anything, because he can't, because he feels that, I depend on these people to get my needs met. I depend on, you know, these people enabling me and making excuses for me. And this is something that the Negro is used to. And this is what I'm seeing, everybody just wants to argue, everybody wants to just complain. It's like you just reach a point where you go, as a guy, as a guy who goes out and says, you know what, I'm not going to go over to this white guy and sit there and beg him to make my stuff. I'm going to go make my own stuff. And if I want to make stuff, like my books, like my SJS, in my SJS direct imprint, like back here, all these books I've published, and there are more that I've published because I've published close to 50 books, because that was another problem I had run into back in the 90s. I was submitting books to publishers and I wasn't going anywhere. I said, look, if I want a solution, if they are not producing the books that I want to publish, I need to produce the books I want to publish, and I need to produce the stories I want to publish. Now, I had plans to do this way back when I was 17 years old, and it was all about, learning about different things and, learning the process. And eventually I got to this point because I wanted a solution. And again, when you solve a problem, you move forward to the next goal. And this is something the Negro has not understood. This is something he just can't get. He wants to stay in the same spot, as the victim. This is why his community has gone nowhere in the last 30, 40 years, because he's still in this victim spot. Because this is what happens when you're a victim. Your whole life just stagnates. And I can tell you that from personal experience. Your whole life just stagnates. You go nowhere. And you just sit there wallowing in your self-pity, sitting in front of this television, drinking your 40 ounces. You just sit there and the world is passing you by. And these same shines who you thought were so cool, or, these people, they're just continuing to wallow in their own dysfunction. They're continuing to enable you in your own dysfunction. And they're going forward, you're going nowhere. And life is just passing you by. And this is something, I think about what solution means. And again, solution, because I know people don't like repeating sometimes, but repetition is the mother of skill, as David Carroll would say. And even as I'm starting to understand, because I put a lot of repetition in my books, so people can get things. Like in the Simp trilogy, I put the repetition in there, so people can get things. And solution means this is finished. This means it's over. This means it's done. This is concluded. We are now moving to the next issue. We are moving to the next goal. It's just like, baking a cake. Once you've emptied the cake mix into the bowl, you move on to the next instruction, which is adding the eggs, adding the water, and then turning on the mixer, mixing this thing up, putting it into the grease pans, sticking it in the oven. And then at the end of the process, you have a baked cake. And after you've baked the cake, after you've cooled the cake, you get the frosting. You take the cakes out of the pan. You put them you put them on the plate, cake plate. Then you frost, and then that's how you get. This is what we call process, and this is something Negro don't understand. He understands, victim. I go to somebody, one of my enablers. The enabler gives me, some crumbs, and I'm able to make it through to another day. And this is why he can't go anywhere. And, and he doesn't want solutions because he doesn't want to take responsibility. He doesn't want to get to that survivor stage. Because in the survivor stage, when you're at that survivor stage, people are going to expect you to start picking up and doing for yourself. Because the whole thing about a victim is that you reach the point where you were powerless. This powerless point. And that but people are expecting you to go from the powerless point back to the point where you became dependent upon yourself. Negro doesn't want to go to that point because, again, he's stuck in a perpetual state of codependency. And he's got these enablers, I call it the unholy trinity, your white liberal politician, your Negro pastor, and your pro-black Afrocentric, all telling him that it's not his fault, it's the fault of all these other people. And the irony is, one of the people who is telling him it's not his fault is the one who is causing all the problems because this liberal is making all the money off the suffering of this Negro. And these other two, members of the unholy trinity are sitting there, you know, getting their little crumbs from the table as well. They're getting a percentage to keep this Negro in this position, as mentally screwed up as he is. Um, as I look at it, this is what solution means, and I really just wanted people to understand what a solution is and what solution in the process of solution, because a solution again is about growth. Solution again will help you move forward. A solution, you know, is about you doing for yourself and getting back to the stage where you can do for yourself, because this is where your black community was before the liberal came in. Negro was doing for himself, and yeah, it wasn't the greatest, it wasn't perfect, but he was doing for himself, and in some cases he was able to hire his own and take care of his own. And this is where people in the civil rights movement wanted to go, to the point where he could become self-sufficient and do for himself. Now he wanted to get back to that stage because the terrorism of the Klan and the Jim Crow policies was impeding the growth of the Negro and the growth of white people. It was really holding the country back. And I look at this whole issue of race, and it's holding the country back. It's keeping the country from growing the way it's supposed to grow. Because if you can't compete with if you're getting to the point where you're falling further and further behind, because if you look at the statistics for education, the United States ranks last. Production, we rank last. And this codependency issue between white white liberals and other races is one of the reasons why things are being held back. This codependent relationship where you have this paternalistic white liberal saying, the only way for you to be somebody is through my process. Him and his pastor and his Afrocentric. This is what's holding back the Negro. You have to follow my process, when this is not the natural process at all. See, the process I explained is the natural process, because you eventually reach a point where you start doing for yourself. And a lot of these Negroes don't want to reach that point. They want to remain in this codependent state where they continue to be the victim, where they continue to sit here and complain about problems over and over and over and over and over and over again. Some of them have even made, a business out of complaining, like your buffer Negroes. And some of these other Negroes, have made a business about, telling this Negro how much of a victim he is. But this is not how you move forward. This is how you stay in the same spot over and wallow in your self-pity. Because, again, people get tired of victims. Um, and I know this for a fact, because my family eventually they were getting tired of me sitting here wallowing in self-pity. Because there was a point where, I had to just pick myself up, because what had happened to me in November of '89, then eventually by January of 1990, February of 1990, really February of 1990, I had to start getting my life together. And then as I kept moving forward, it was about me, setting that plan in effect. And when I changed schools, I started, it really helped, because I had to start looking at myself and saying I needed to take control of my own education, and I needed to take control of my own life. Yeah, it's been a rough road, but I took control, and that's how I graduated high school. That's how I got my diploma. Now I had to stop for 6 months, after I graduated high school because I had anxiety about going to college because I dreaded having to deal with this Negro. I dreaded having to deal with this Cro-Magnon savage, this Congo gorilla, um, and his ignorance, because I thought, your college, you would have to deal with more of these savages again and their insane quest for social currency, their male attention whoring, their backbiting, their cattiness, because these Negro males, they act just like women. They gossip like women. I've seen this, firsthand. And they argue over the silliest things. They get emotional over the silliest things. And if you disagree with this Negro, if you present a different, state of blackness that they don't agree with or understand, they want to destroy you because this is what they wanted to do with me. And I can honestly tell you this. Because when their shaming tactics don't work, when they can't get you to conform, when none of this works, they try to destroy you, and they will start physically attacking you and physically assaulting you. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't want to go to college at the time, because I feared, having to deal with this savage again on a regular basis, and it would make me anxious, because I've had to deal with this savage. I'm not saying all black people are savages, because there are some good black folks out here. I'm just saying that when you have to, if you ever experienced this savage, if you ever experienced his insanity, you will come to the same conclusion because everybody has to be like him, everybody has to agree with him, and the world has to revolve, around them and the way that they live. This is how he lives. And if you represent anything outside of his box, if you represent any ideas outside of his box, he's going to try to destroy you if you live in his community. And this is something, I've had to deal with since junior high school back in 1985. And I can honestly, tell people this is why I understand this Negro doesn't want solutions. Because, again, solution means I have to come out of what I knew, as I said in the other what you knew, into something different. And you have to use that something different to move forward. And this is something, many Negroes don't want to do. They want to remain in the codependent pattern with the liberal because they're afraid of going out and getting their needs met. They're afraid of going out and solving their own problems. It's like I look at it, I can even go back to they have these flashbacks, like some of these Negroes, they're thinking that Rosewood is going to happen again. Some of them, and because I even talked to my own family about this type of thing, and they don't. It's like some of them was like, um, you know, if we do this, they may come back and destroy. It's like no, no, Negro, nobody's going to come back and destroy it. Are they? You have to really look at it from a logical perspective. Are they destroying? Are people destroying what the Indians have? Are they destroying what these Arabs have? Because we had 9/11 here, and no one is going after a single Arab here in America. Um, is anybody destroying the very same Hispanics? These are all people who are in the Negro's own community. Are people trying to tear them down? These people are piggybacking themselves on the pain of the Negro, doing what he should do for himself, and moving themselves forward to the middle class. These people, as I've seen, they're sending their kids to college, on the back of this Negro. And he's still sitting here wallowing in self-pity, talking about ongoing legacy of slavery. Even some of them talking about white supremacy to the point of insane levels. Now, there is white supremacy in the world. It is a religion that many people follow unknowingly and unconsciously. It does exist, but it's not an excuse not to do for yourself. And this is what the Negro uses it as. Because, again, solution means the problem is solved and you have to move forward. And this is something he doesn't want to do because if you have to do for yourself, and the whole thing is that if you have to do for yourself, others may expect the other Negroes to start doing for themselves. This is one of the reasons why they want to destroy, anybody who comes to this way of thinking and comes to this conclusion of thinking because they don't want people to ask them to start doing for themselves. Because if they see a guy like me doing for myself, the people are going to look around and go, well, why can't this other Negro do it? Why can't these other Negroes, go out and do this? Why are they, just still sitting here complaining? This other guy He has no money and he's been out of work for several years, but he's still trying to build something. Why are these other Negroes, why do they have to stand outside of this foreign owned store? This is the type of questions, that people are going to start asking this Negro. And these Negroes don't want those questions asked because those questions, they're going to put them on a spot. And those questions are going to make people start examining this Negro and understanding, that codependent pattern between him and his enablers in the whole unholy trinity. Um, and that's what's going to happen. And he doesn't want people to start asking those hard questions because if they start asking those hard questions, people are going to start asking him to start rolling up his sleeves and doing for himself and using the resources in his own community to start moving himself forward. And this is something he doesn't want to do because, again, for him, the position of the victim is a position of power. When in real life, the position of the victim is a position of weakness. I know this from personal experience, and this is the reason why I can talk about it, is because when you become a victim, you are completely powerless, you are completely vulnerable, and you can't do anything about it. But when you become a survivor, you start learning how to adapt, and you start learning how to do for yourself, and you start learning, to begin that recovery process so you can move yourself forward. Um, you can buy my books on Amazon.com, paperbacks and ebooks. There, you can just click the link in the description box. There is a whole lot of positive African American fiction there. There is some great nonfiction, like my Simp trilogy, on there. Um, these Simp trilogy books will help you move your life forward. I also have a great blog, www.shawnsjames.blogspot.com. Lots of great information on there, and there's all sorts of resources out here for you guys. You just have to use them to move yourself forward. And I'm urging you, to keep pushing and moving yourself forward. Because the position again of the victim is a position of powerlessness, and when you're powerless, people are going to exploit you and take advantage of you. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.